Hi, Kara. How are you doing tonight?
I'm well. How are the two of you?
I'm fantastic.
Doing better. Doing much better now that we get to talk to you tonight. So are you in Minneapolis then? Or
I'm right next door in St. Paul.
Okay.
But they're the Twin Cities for a reason. They are very close to each other.
Yeah. I've been up there. Beautiful place. Too cold, but I mean, you have board games.
The snow only just melted up like a week ago, and they're still talking about like we might get one more April blizzard before the month's out. So yeah, the good thing about board games is you can just do those indoors.
Yeah, no, no, that's great. I mean, you get to design and play board games. So if people don't know, Kara Centell-Dunk is a designer and developer and writer for FFG. Been working there for about 8 years. Most recently, lead designer on Descent: Legends of the Dark, and has worked on Mansions of Madness 2nd edition and the Lord of the Rings Journeys in Middle Earth game, and likes making things, board game and not, and has even replaced all right, maybe I'm getting this wrong, but most, at least, if not all, of the pieces in Patchwork with buttons, and is currently cross-stitching the Wi-Fi password for when guests come. Is that all correct? Or did I miss something? Okay.
That's all correct. One of my hobbies is collecting hobbies.
I have that hobby. I also started cross-stitching. I collected that. Yeah.
Collected cross-stitching, right? So it's like one of the many things.
To say that I started kind of infers that you also started, and I don't know if you just started cross-stitching in the last year. Did you?
Oh, no, that was a pre-pandemic hobby. Most of the pandemic I've just been playing video games. Though I did, my partner and I have gotten really into fermenting things, which was part of our pandemic hobbies.
Oh man, I just made a whole bunch of sauerkraut again, and then I got my kombucha going, my booch, and then I've been making kimchi for years. And
go ahead.
That was it.
Oh, we really want to make kimchi. One of our staples right now, what we're making is we do a fermented ginger and garlic paste. So you ferment the ginger and garlic, and then you blend it all together at the end. And it is just a great thing to have on hand for cooking. just You can throw it in with some vegetables, easy side dish, toss it in with some meat, easy flavoring, toss it into stir fry on rice bowls. It's pretty much just great. I mean, it's ginger and garlic with a bit of tang.
Yeah, I just ginger was on sale, and I was like, I'm gonna start a ginger bug again, which I haven't, and I need to get rid of this ginger soon, so I might have to do that. Are you just doing like a 2% brine in our board game podcast?
Yeah, welcome to this board game podcast. We're going to tell you all about all the things we're fermenting and how to do them.
But this is what we talk about. It's fine. Go ahead.
Well, I started a Stitch a Day calendar thing where you do. I wanted to do embroidery, so I started in January 1st. I started stitching. I did fireworks for January 1st. I did a J for January 2nd, and I put it down.
Yeah. I dove fully into cross stitch. I really liked its resemblance to pixels. So like you can do a lot of sprite art in cross stitch that's really fun. I've also really enjoyed the genre of subversive cross stitch, which is using classical cross stitching patterns but with more modern like sayings, like memes, like cross stitching memes is usually really fun, especially because it's an internet thing, and so expressing it in kind of a quote unquote old timey way I find funny. So yeah.
So I made for my partner was a stitch of from The Office. It was a scene from The Office where Kevin spilled the chili, and that's yeah. Anyway, I guess we could talk about board games. Sorry.
Let's get there gradually. What you mentioned that wasn't a pandemic hobby. What hobbies did you pick up during the pandemic then?
Well, again, I mostly played
Okay, so you
I mostly
didn't
play
pick
video
up
games.
anything else. It's just
We-
what have you been playing in video games then?
Well, I mean, recently I've been playing Elden Ring, which a lot of people are playing these days.
Yeah.
It's my first that genre of game or that company of game, the FromSoft games, because I didn't think I would like them, but my partner got a copy and I was like, oh, I'll just try it out. And I've now put in frankly a horrifying amount of hours into that game. And just doing the weirdest stuff. Like I don't know anything about these games, so I've just been living my best life. And I had some friends come over and I opened like my stat block and they were like, I'm sorry, what are you doing with this character? You're level 80 and you've never upgraded your health. And I was like, well, I just don't get hit. And they're like, what do you mean you just don't get hit?
Well, yeah,
like,
that
I
was
don't know.
you. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I just it is apparently not the way most people would choose to play this game, which I can understand because if anything hits me, I die immediately in that game. But like, I think it's I kept when I started doing it, I was like, oh, I'll just put because when you level up, you can put points into health if you want. I was like, well, when I stop doing this or this gets frustrating, I'll start putting points into health then. And then it just turns out I think it's really funny. Like I like doing like weird cheesy things in games, especially in video games. And so like I like figuring out like how enemies path so that I can stand in safe places and spam them with magic. And I like being like, okay, I will die immediately. So like, do I have any items that I can use on this monster to stop them from attacking me so that I can get enough attacks off to not die? And so it is I'm sure there are challenges that have been made way harder by this way of playing. I didn't realize how uncommon it was until, like I said, some friends who play the game were like deeply horrified by my life choices in Elden Ring. But I'm having a blast.
I think it was you. I think you popped up on my Twitter feed something about like either the monster is dead in 2 minutes or I'm dead in 2 minutes. There is no middle ground. Yep. Okay. Yeah.
I did. Yeah, that was me. I posted that. It is faster than 2 minutes. And also, I did find because if you die fast enough in a boss chamber, because your runes reset, the thing you drop when you die resets to like a couple of seconds beforehand, it'll drop outside the boss room. Just it might be relevant to know. So if I die quickly enough and I'm like, oh, I don't want to do this boss fight now, I just grab my runes and leave.
That's
Like, yeah,
convenient.
maybe I'll come back, maybe I won't, but yeah.
Like that. Con's my dump stat for games, so I respect it.
I mean, so do you try to break? I don't want to use that word. Do you try to
Explore mechanics.
find the outside way of playing the games that you work on at FFG in the same way that like, hey, somebody might do this and it might not work. I mean, because I've heard some designers who say like, just ignore edge cases, and others are like, you have to account for edge cases. Where do you fall on that spectrum of dealing with edge cases in design?
Sure. I think some of my approach is that I think edge cases can be fun, right?
Mhm.
Like I
Yeah.
have fun navigating that in Elden Ring, whereas I think other people might interact with that in a much different way, where they might be maybe they're disappointed that a monster can't follow you up a rock, whereas I get to use it as like part of my strategy, which is I think sometimes affectionately and sometimes not so affectionately referred to as cheesing. And so I think that edge cases can be fun. I think the problem arises with edge cases when it causes confusion or frustration for the player. Like when they don't know how to resolve something because it's an edge case and the rules don't tell them what to do about it. And so it causes arguments at the table or it causes play to slow down at the table. So I think edge cases can be interesting as long as the players know how to resolve them and play with them and to feel confident embracing them. But if they just cause, if on the other hand, if they are not well designed is maybe not the right word because I don't think anyone, well, I certainly don't intentionally design edge cases. When I find them, I tend to go, is this like a fun thing for players or is it not? And if it's not, I need to fix it. And if it is, I have to consider does the fun outweigh any like weirdness to allowing it? Or does the fix introduce weirdness? Because that's the other thing about edge cases is sometimes when you're trying to find a solution for them, you can overcomplicate your rule set for something that will affect such a small amount of players. And so it's finding the happy solution for then, how do I either fix this without adding complication, or is it worth the complication to fix? Or does the edge case need fixing at all? So I guess you'll hear a lot tonight me being like, well, it depends. And that is the first of many well, it depends answers.
Yeah. So to go backwards, what are some of your favorite tabletop and board games, and do they, just to keep it relevant on that topic, do they have edge cases, or probably more importantly, what keeps you interested in those favorite games?
Sure.
That's a lot.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a big question. So as far as favorite board games go, I tend to have a really broad taste. Like, I like playing lots of different kinds of games. And so one of the things to fit into like what keeps me interested is sometimes like I can rotate through different types of games. Like one of my favorite games is Patchwork, which is a cute little abstract game for 2 players that my partner and I play in like 30 minutes or less. And then one of my other favorite games is Legacy of Dragonholt, which is the board game version of a choose your own adventure, where you go through like a whole character creation, and then you play an adventure that has a lot of descriptive text and like also some emergent narrative. And so some of it is just the breadth of games I enjoy allow me to cycle through them at different times and kind of appreciate the differences between them. And I think one of the other things that brings me back to games is I'm someone who also enjoys like reading books and watching movies over again, because I feel like I get to experience new things about them that maybe I couldn't notice the first time, because usually the first time I play any game, it needs to be a learning game. And so when I revisit games, I tend to enjoy experiencing them, knowing more about them. And then even for something small like Patchwork, it tends to be because I actually just enjoy the experience so much that I'm like, yeah, I want to continue satisfyingly drafting tiles and building my little quilt. So
That's cool. I mean, yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, I need to get on Twitter or whatever to see pictures of this Patchwork that you're making that Christopher mentioned in the beginning. What are you?
Have you shared pictures of it?
I heard words about it, so I just want to see
Oh,
it.
okay.
I figured it was on social networking because I'm not on social networking, and everything's on social networking.
I don't know. I don't know if Kara has shared pictures of it. Have you?
I haven't shared pictures of Patchwork. If you do a Google image search, Patchwork board game, it should come up. But it's a real little Uwe Rosenberg game.
Oh no, I know what Patchwork is.
Yeah. We know.
I thought you were doing a custom board. I thought you were making a custom board.
That is, it is on my list of things to do, actually. I want to make Patchwork with, I have a lot of fabrics. Speaking of collecting hobbies, I have a lot of fabric samples. So I've already replaced all the buttons in my Patchwork game. I don't have any pictures of that out. So like, there's the single buttons and the 5 buttons, and then the big block of buttons. And so I hot glue and thrifting, and I made a bunch of actual button tokens. But the next thing I want to do is replace all the tiles in Patchwork with stiff fabric tiles. And then make probably a custom canvas board to put them on. So that is a long-standing project I want to do, because that is how much I enjoy Patchwork and how much I'd like to have kind of a custom copy of it. Some other people have done something similar. I saw something on Reddit a while ago that I think is brilliant, which is someone did that and then they stored it in a Royal Dance cookie tin, which if you're from a household that does a lot of sewing, Royal Dance, there's something about Royal Dance cookie tins. Yeah, exactly. You bust that open, there's never cookies inside. It's always hobby stuff.
Yep.
Like, yep. So I would also, I think, enjoy seeing if I could then fit it all back into a Royal Dance tin instead of a different container.
That would be perfect.
Right? But I haven't done that fully yet. I've only upgraded the buttons so far.
Young family members will come over and be like, "These aren't cookies. It's a board game."
They'll get so excited for cookies and open up. They'll be like, "Oh, it's another board game." Gosh. Like...
So on that note, how did you get into board games yourself?
Sure, I have been into games basically my entire life. Tabletop games is a little bit more specific, but I was so into games that in high school, my friends for my 16th birthday made me a Monopoly themed cake. Like, that is my love of games in general and broadly goes very deep. I didn't start playing tabletop games until college. I had some. I played Magic the Gathering a bit growing up, and I had family members who were super into like cousins and uncles who were super into Magic the Gathering and D&D, and I always wanted to play with them. But I was also like very shy and like never invited myself to go play or was invited to go play. And so when I got into college, that was when I started making friends with people who were running RPGs and who were like, yeah, come play an RPG. It's when I met my current partner who was already in like the nerd scene. I was in the nerd scene, but like in an adjacent nerd scene, and was like, you really love games. I think you would really love like hobby tabletop games. You should be playing these. And I played, I want to say it would have been like Thunderstone, or maybe Munchkin. And I was like, you're right. I would love, I would love these games. But my heart was certainly sealed the first time I played Arkham Horror 2nd Edition, which was nothing like I'd ever played before. And which I think more than any other game I kind of played in that very early time, which was just post-college, is how I got really into tabletop gaming.
How, well, that's precipitous. How did you, what drew you to Arkham Horror 2nd? You said 2nd edition, right?
Yeah, yep.
Yeah. What drew you to it? What about it?
So I loved the emergent gameplay of that game a lot. Like the fact that you were kind of like, you're given this character, and it helps that like the 1920s archetypes, like the detective and the magician and the dilettante, those are all archetypes that I find very fun.
Trash can Pete. Sorry.
Yeah. Yep. Jenny Barnes and Dexter Drake were two of my favorites. Though I would later also really like from the Arkham universe, Akachi Onyele. They're all really fun characters to play in Arkham. And so Michael McGlenn was another favorite, the gangster. And so I love taking on a character and then kind of just being let loose in a city. And like there were things you should do in Arkham, right? Like close gates or fight monsters. But there were so many, and usually each person was kind of tackling a different thing. Like someone who got a lot of like weapon cards and stuff would be like, "Oh, I'll go fight the monsters," and be like, "Okay, I'll jump into this gate." And so there's something very as a first step into tabletop, there's something very beautiful about that combination of like almost like an RPG board game, right? And I think it may be kind of weird to hear that said about Arkham 2nd now, when I think we've leaned so much more into RPGs in the board game space since. But especially really early on, when I was entering the hobby, that kind of storytelling and also storytelling in the hands of the players felt so new to me. And so I got really excited. Later, I would get deeply into not just these kinds of games, but also Euro games, because it turns out I also just like puzzles. But yeah.
Like what were some of the first Euro games that you remember playing that you enjoyed then?
Power Grid, which is actually was also on my list of like favorite games and is to this day. Like I think Power Grid is one of the most exquisitely designed games. I love how I love the self-balancing to it. I love how in every part of that round I'm always planning for the next part of the round. Like the money management in that game is so for me at least fun. Like I also I tend to enjoy auction games, and so like I also really love the part where I'm like calculating what everyone else is getting into and trying to like get into a fuel that no one else is, or like trying to figure out what factories other people are going to want to pick up so I can decide like which ones I want to pick up. And so there's this kind of mix of economic management and like social reading, I guess.
Yeah,
that combines in Power Grid that I really enjoy.
Cool.
I forgot about that game. I don't know how I forgot about Power Grid.
For a hot minute, that was like the game that, at least in my experience, hobby players were playing all the time, like for a good year and a half or so.
I played it late too at like a con.
Oh, okay.
And somebody was like, "You've never played Power Grid?" I was like, "I just didn't get a chance." And then I was like, "Oh,
yeah,
nice.
I don't mean that in a gatekeeping way at all, but like it definitely had its moment in the sun where like it got to shine.
Yeah,
and it's still, I agree, it's still a very solid game. I don't know if love it the way you do, and that's okay. But so did your experience with Arkham like drive you to find a game with excuse me, find a job with FFG?
It did not. It's actually
Okay.
well, I think it's I guess I think it's kind of funny, and I also think it's it can serve as encouragement to people out there who want to design games. I applied at FFG because I was going to Gen Con for the first time. This 8 years ago, in
Okay.
fact, or a little over 8 years ago, because I would have had to have gone through a whole interview process. But I was going to Gen Con that year, and Gen Con shared a post that was like, "Our friends at FFG are hiring." And at the time, the position was called a creative content developer. And I was like, "Oh, well, what's that?" And I looked into it, and it was like, "We want people to develop content for games. It's going to be like a lot of writing and coming up with game mechanics." And I was like, "I have a degree in writing, and I like playing games a lot." And I was, at the time, I'd only been in the like hobby for like a year or two, like full into the hobby, like
Yeah.
hosting game nights for my friends and sucking them into the hobby, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And so I was like, "Oh, I should look more into this." Then I looked into it, and I was like, "Oh, they're the people who made Arkham Second, which I like." And they
That's
and they
funny.
make this Descent Second, which I owned and I also really liked, which is also an early game that I really enjoyed playing. And so I saw the job description. At the time, I was recently out of college, like within my first 2 years out of college, and had a very hard time finding a job. So I was working retail, and so I was like, I mean, the worst they'll say is no, and I've heard that a lot at this point. And so in a very, very normal way, I saw a job listing and was like, "I think I can do that," and then applied. And thankfully, Fantasy Flight agreed that they thought I could also do that. And I've been able to make games since.
That's fantastic. Cool.
I almost applied to AEG in like the early aughts. And but then I was like, no way. But now, if I could turn back time, Kara, I'd be like, well, this was inspirational. I should have done it.
Yeah, that is
Moved to Washington. I was living in my car at the time, and somebody said, "Hey, man, the thing is if you move out there with the rate that they're paying you, you could still live in your car."
I will say, board games is not in my well, at least at my level, is my experience is that no one at my level is making money in board games.
Yeah.
Like it's actually gotten significantly better recently, in the last 4 to 5 years. But yeah, when I first moved out here, I mean, it was easy to be like, well, this is the most I've ever been paid, because I was working as a shift lead at Walgreens before that, right? And so it was the most money I'd ever been paid. And even then I was like, they should really pay us more. Which they eventually started doing. I still think they could pay us more, but we are paid way more than we used to be, which I like, and our starting salaries are of course commensurately higher. But yeah,
Yeah, we don't-
I mean, it's a big company now, so like they're probably, I get it. You can't be like, "Hey, we're just trying to get our foot in the door." You're like,
yeah, they're not. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, my joke was gonna be Fantasy Flight Games. Now, what do they make? Are they a new company? I haven't heard of them.
Yeah. Well, and that's it, right? Like, I joined right when growth was really like exploding, and this was before Asmodee, the Asmodee merger even. But even then, growth was really exploding, and so there was a lot of like, "Oh, we're a real company now. Like, we're not just a bunch of people in a warehouse doing their best, right? Like, we're a name in the hobby. We're somewhat of an institution. Like, maybe we should pay people more."
You joined like peak. Hold on. Yeah, peak Netrunner.
Yep.
Or peak Netrunner for me. I might have been at that Gen Con you went to, was the year that maybe that was the first year that they did Netrunner. And I only know when Netrunner, and I see, the thing is I loved Netrunner. Loved.
Are we going to talk about this?
Oh my God.
Netrunner is very worthy of love. I also love Netrunner very, very much. Netrunner debuted a little bit before I did. I think the year I think it was just a year or two before I started at FFG.
Okay.
But it was still like it was strong. Like one of the very first things I did at FFG, like for fun, meeting my coworkers, was a Netrunner tournament, like a staff Netrunner tournament, because it was as beloved by the staff as it was by the player base.
Yeah. If I could go back, I think that first 2 years of Netrunner was probably like peak card flipping time for me. Now I won't touch cards. I won't touch any of them. No more cards for me. I'm too old. I can't keep up with the meta.
It gets deep. Netrunner was actually one of the things that pulled me back into card games that weren't like deck builders, right? Card games where you had to keep up with a card pool, and there'd be things coming in and out of rotation and things like that. And Netrunner was one of the few things that pulled me in, because I was like, yeah, I really liked it. Like I really had a blast playing it. Speaking of a game that combines social reading with engaging mechanics, right?
And edge mechanics.
Yes. Yep. So
just
but yeah, I agree. I'm also I've looked at some of the card games. I've been like, wow, those card games look great, but man, I can barely keep up with all the board games I want to play, much less like one card game line that goes so deep.
Yeah, no, it was like you walk away for like 2 months and then you come back and you're like, oh, I don't know. It's like what happened. But it was a lot of fun. It was an amazing experience. And I sold all of my promotional items for like a significant amount of money. Paid for some healthcare costs, man. It was great, you know.
Nice.
Like nothing like selling your top 8 Netrunner playmats. And I had a lot of them. I traveled. I loved it. God,
the
it was so
hustle is
good.
real.
Since we're talking about fantasy flight, and Kara, if you don't want to go here, we can immediately go elsewhere. But what are you excited about at Fantasy Flight right now that you can share? Because I know there's probably stuff still under development you can't talk about. But is there stuff that's coming soon that you can talk about that you're excited, or?
So I can't talk directly about any unannounced projects, but there's one thing I can talk about that is kind of like I'm excited about it. And it's really hard to be like, I promise it's gonna pay off really good stuff. But I know I can talk about it because it was part of our Gen Con presentation last year, but that's as a studio, in the last 2 years, we've really deeply invested in a new research and development process. That's tapping more of our internal designers who've been working at the company for years and years into giving pitches for games they want to see. So like previously at FFG, a lot of what happened was you would essentially be like given a project rather than being able to, and like my colleagues and I have done really great things with projects we were given, and I think we've made a lot of cool things. But there's something very fun and very exciting right now internally about having so many more opportunities to pitch up and be like, these are games we think we want to see our company make. These are games we're really excited about as designers or as players that we want to see in the market, and games that we think FFG should be making. And so they've done a lot of investing in like, well, what does R&D look like at our company? How do we create those avenues now for our internal designers? And so that was something our executive designer, Nate French, talked about at Gen Con last year, which is why I know I can talk about it to some extent anyway. But that's something I'm really excited about. And there are some projects coming out of that I cannot wait until we get to announce them, because I think that they're going to be really exciting. Unfortunately, board games move super slowly because you make them and then they kind of you forget about them for 6 months while they're being like made and shipped, and hopefully that only takes 6 months nowadays, but it might not. It might take longer, and then eventually one day it shows up in the warehouse and you're like, oh good, we can like maybe you've announced it, maybe you're about to announce it, but yeah, there's a long period between initial pitch of a board game and it like being announced or even on shelves. So there's stuff coming out of that I'm really excited about. But just as far as like, I think one of the things FFG is really strong at is that like I work with so many talented people, and like I'll never shut up about that because like I'm so lucky to work with some of the people I work with. Like I work with some extremely talented folks who now have years of game design under their belt. And there's so much we learn from each other and from our experiences because we're all like, one of the benefits of all being under one studio is that like you can collaborate really easily and, you know, learn from not just your mistakes, but mistakes you see other people making and triumphs you see other people making. And so I'm really excited to see us as a studio tap into that and the kind of projects that will come out of that passion and that energy. So I'm excited about that. I know it's not as exciting as talking about products, but I think it's exciting.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I'll say it from my side. I have enjoyed many, and this just happened to be here. I didn't even grab it to for tonight, but like I've enjoyed many of the IP products. I would be very excited to see what some of the same writers and designers come up with if they aren't tied to an IP product. So I don't know if that's what you're talking about or not, but hopefully so, because I think that there are some talented people there. So on going with that, what do you think the most difficult part of game design is? Collaboration is cool, but what gets in the way? What's a roadblock for you?
Yeah, so there's probably two. I'm a little unusual in that I deeply enjoy pretty much every process of the game. There are there's two places though that stick out because I enjoy so much of the other process. One of which is I love it when a game is super messy. So like you release it and you're like, oh, I just see these problems. And like one playthrough or like half around it, and you're like, okay, I already know I need to fix this. I need to change that. That's way too overpowered. That's not doing what I want it to do. Players have forgotten this rule completely. And so there's like really easy things that you're like, okay, I'll just set them up and knock them down as far as changes are concerned. So there's like that part of your project. And then there's the part at the end when it's like ready to be polished. So it's like all together now and you can focus more on like, how do I make it shine? There's a narrow window between it's a hot mess and it's ready to be polished where it's like close, but you can't, it's not obvious what's wrong anymore, but it's also not where it needs to be. And so you tend to, this isn't even a balance thing because I think balancing comes a little bit later even than that stage. This is just a like mechanic creating moment where you're like, okay, these are the mechanics, but they're not giving the player experience quite what I want them to, or this mechanic feels complex, but I haven't come up with a simpler way to do it, but it's not as intuitive as I would like, where the problems and solutions aren't as clear, but it's not solved and ready for polish yet. And so that is can be a very frustrating time to be in, because it feels close, right? It feels like an approximation of where you want it to be. So you don't want to tip it over so bad that you take a step back, but you also don't want to settle at not quite where you want it to be. So that part like, I find.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, that part I find really frustrating. It's like when you're hanging a picture and you're like, it's not super crooked, but it's not straight. So you're like just doing the little tab touches to try and get it just right.
As you're describing it, like the word that came to my mind is like quagmire, because it's like you want to make progress, you know you've made progress, you see where you want to go, but you just feel stuck on your feet.
Yeah.
Yeah,
especially when you know, especially because usually you know where you want it to be, and so it's just how do I bridge that, right? The other place that I think is really challenging is creating the language, settling on your rules language for your game. I think once you have the rules language, writing the rules is actually, it's challenging but really fun, and so it's not as challenging, but it's deciding on the cohesive vocabulary that's going to be in your game and how your rules and component text are presented. Because there's a really wide spectrum of how you might decide to express those things in your game, from extremely technical to extremely loose. And it is, everyone has an opinion. And I'm here to say very few people are objectively correct in those conversations.
Does FFG do blind play testing and things like that? Or okay.
Yep, we do blind play testing. We have there's a whole slew of things. So we'll play test internally and we'll play test blind, where we just give out our rules and ask people to play. And then we also do the testing where we ask them to play and we observe them playing to see what they get right and wrong. Much I think to sometimes their stress. We have we do card councils at several points during a project, which is where you get everyone in a room who's on the project, as well as usually a couple of people who are technically proficient at language, like a technical writer. And you say, okay, we're going to look at every component in this, and we're going to talk about whether they're cohesive, whether the cards are whether similar cards are written similarly, and if this is the best way to write our cards and rules. So there's a lot of and then it goes through like entire approvals processes where people are people on a like approval committee look at all your components and they go, hey, I don't think your language makes sense, or they go, yeah, your language looks great. So then it also goes to like proofreaders and editors. So yeah, it's there's a lot of stages at which the language is checked and rechecked. And this is kind of right at the beginning of that, where you're like, okay, what does this language look like even before I start having those conversations?
Mm-hmm. Do you have a question, Ryan? You look like you're in thought as Kara's saying all that.
Muted. I muted myself. I was just saying I appreciate that kind of work because the cohesiveness and stuff. I was playing something recently, which is weird because I don't actually play games. I just talk about it. And and I was going through the rule book and I was like, this is wildly inconsistent. And so there's a big thing when you're talking about playing games with people, you have rules as written and rules as intended. And I prefer to play with people that can understand what an intention of a rule is rather than their ability to read a rule, because it doesn't mean that the rule was actually written correctly, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so in designing rule books, that's a big thing you have to do, is you have to have your idea of how it's laid out and what the language is and how so that it's consistent.
Well, I'll give an example of that, and maybe this is one that you're thinking of. I recently played through the 8 campaigns in Welcome to the Moon. Loved it. Really enjoyed it. But like, not everything felt like it made it from French to English well.
No.
You know? and go ahead, Ryan.
I remembered what it was. We played Tomb from 2008 AEG game.
Oh gosh, yeah.
So
okay.
that's not a fair comparison, but they actually have they at some point had named the deck of cards that you draw from one thing, and then on the board they called it another. And
yeah.
But whatever. It's like it's weird to say that like 2008, when you have a game like that that's still cutting edge, you know, any of these games that were early, that were big and expansive.
But well, I mean I knew FFG was big. I didn't realize that they were that big, because that's a lot of people in that process.
I mean
go
we're
ahead.
big for board games, right? Like,
right. Oh yeah.
We're like a 40-person studio, but some of these are freelancers. So we talk about everyone on the project. Everyone on the project is sometimes like 2 people plus our technical writer.
Okay.
It's 2 people, their producer, so 2 designers, their producer, and the technical writer.
Okay.
The studio approval committee is a bit of a larger thing because it's basically everyone takes shifts on it, but it's really cool because it's a multidisciplinary committee that checks projects over before they go to beta testing and before they go to be approved for print. And so they pull someone from each department. So there's someone from graphic design on studio approval and someone from art on studio approval. And there's a designer on studio approval. And they have everyone all look over products files now that we're remote, to be like, all right, like, does anyone notice anything, basically? And usually you're probably going to be able to make comments that are more in your wheelhouse. Like, I tend to leave lots of comments on rule books and almost no comments on like a graphic design template, because that is not my expertise.
Yeah.
But
so in some ways, still working like a smaller company in some ways, because okay, that's cool.
Yeah, it's we do our best. And then things come out, and then I'm like, oh yeah, languages, it turns out, more malleable than it made sense to all of us and to our like 20+ playtest groups. But you know, we print, say, 8,000 copies of something, and in 8,000 play groups, it doesn't make sense to all 8,000 of those play groups.
What with that, what do you want, so that rules kind of get out of the way, because that's the whole goal of all that, right? So that when somebody's playing, they kind of intuit the rules for the most part, and then they can get into the nitty gritty of the game. What experience are you most besides fun, because that's the easy one, but what experience are you most wanting players to have when they come to a game that you've worked on?
I was gonna say fun, so you've already cut me off there. The
I
other
mean,
thing I was gonna say, the other thing I was gonna say, which might be a little like weirdly specific, is I want players to feel considered when they play my games.
Okay.
So some of that is I think sometimes you can play games and you can be like, this is a really interesting design, but I'm not sure it was always considered like how a player would interact with it, or how a player would interact with the physical components at the table, especially in a tabletop game. And so I want players to feel like on multiple levels, a game has like thought about how they will be physically moving around the table, how they'll be playing this game, how they'll be thinking about this game, and done its level best to set them up to play it, if that makes sense. So that's something as simple as like something that comes up in a lot of games, which is like a weird, super minor thing. But something I've observed is like when you have a target number in games, it's like you'll play up until this point on a track. What a lot of people will naturally do is they'll grab a component that's not being used and they'll place it on that track to be like, okay, that's a reminder that like when we get to space 14, this game ends or whatever. Or in the example of Power Grid, when we get to 7, we unlock the second spaces in the cities. When we get to 12, we unlock the third spaces in the cities.
Yeah.
And so like there's this kind of moment where it's like, well, it'd be nice if the game just did that for us instead of asking the players to come up with some of these solutions. And so when players, one of the things I would like to do in games is find ways that players are intuitively already interacting with the game and essentially enable that for them. So they, especially players who don't normally play tabletop games, who might not know about these things that would make their very slight quality of life improvements, have those available to them without having to have, be immersed in the culture of playing board games.
I mean, I think those types of things are what can make a difference between the first and second play. Because if you don't get to that second play often, then you're like, well, I'll sell that game or give that game away, or just never touch that game again. If it's somebody else's. So yeah, those are important things. Consideration. That's a good way to put it. I like it. It's cool.
That sounds I that sounds so hard. It sounds like the perfect encapsulation of like the perfecting a game is what it sounds like, and I love it. That is, I'm down if I'm playing a game and like if it thing and I'm just like, oh well, how are we, and it just does it. Like you move that track, but then that obviously triggers. So you're not like, oh, wait, did we miss that? And it's all just this smooth, perfect experience. That is a good answer. I'm glad you didn't say fun.
I'm glad I didn't say fun now too.
Yeah. I just want to level up board games, just make them inherently better.
I was actually thinking about TI4 as you're talking about that, which I know that kind of sounds counterintuitive, but like the first time I played TI4, I was like, why are these tiles so big? And then as you were describing this, I was like, oh wait, that was completely intentional to make this feel the way it should feel as you play the game, as people get these massive fleets and everything going on. It should feel like it fills up and it isn't I mean, it's the board still feel, but I've played other 4X games and stuff that feel a lot more cluttered than that game, and I think that's part of the reason I keep, anytime I have a chance to play that game, I want to come back to it because it feels right, and I never thought about it that way. So I don't know, for what that's worth.
Elegance. It's elegance and beauty in game design. I love it.
And that's when you haven't worked on it. FFT, but it is an FFT product. All right. What does it mean? I think you answered part of it, but this was a question I sent you before. And what does it mean for a game to be immersive for you?
So what I think it means, and I've thought about this a lot as someone who works on a lot of big narrative board games that are sometimes considered immersive. Some of it's subjective, right? Like
Sure.
player taste, what they enjoy. But ultimately, what I think makes a game immersive is when your feelings you get from playing the game line up with how you would expect an in-universe person to feel at this moment in that position. Simulationist mechanics are one way of doing that, right? Like if I am doing a gambling mechanic and I'm feeling that risk of luck as I roll my dice, then I feel like a gambler in setting might, right? But I think that there are other ways to do that. Like I play visual novels, like video game wise, which I find really interesting because there are some visual novels that I would say feel immersive, despite the fact that their mechanics aren't immersive mechanics. But there's something about, for example, like if you're playing through in a game, having a tense conversation or an argument, and you go into like a Tetris mini game, there is something that feels the same in that because you're trying to rapidly piece together what you want to say and like clear it out, but also one mistake and then you have to start all over again or reconfigure your plans. And there's this mounting pressure as the pieces fall and as the speed like carries up. And if you're playing it versus the computer, you're also kind of keeping an eye on what the computer's doing, and you can kind of visually see it doing better or worse than you. And so your feelings of that kind of like stress and needing to string something together and pressure and also trying to figure out what someone else is doing, but also being so caught up in your own thing feels like an argument, if that makes sense. Like the emotional experience is very similar, even though the mechanics are very not what you would consider like mechanics for an argument. You're like, well, I'm just playing Tetris. Like, but the emotions it elicits make it feel like you're in that moment and you're having that immersive experience. So that is as best as I can tell what I think makes a game immersive.
Wow.
I feel like I'm in an argument, man. I have so much anxiety. It's like that's why I like to play with people that know what rules as intended means. Like, no, it says this. And I'm like, well, yeah, it does, but it doesn't mean, oh.
Well, there's something fascinating in video games that is different in board games where video games, especially indie video games have embraced like exploring what other emotions can games make you feel. Whereas board games, especially as a communal activity, they kind of interact with the emotional landscape very differently because you're with a crowd of people, which like, as someone who's worked in like horror board games and has to kind of have asked myself the question, like, how do you make someone feel scared in a tabletop board game setting? In a setting where people innately are coming at that table to come together and have fun and like make jokes usually, like what do you do to create tone or fear in those kinds of games? Or should you, like, or well, I mean, I do think you should, right? Like, I think embracing different emotional notes in board games means that there's more different kinds of board games for more different kinds of people. But yeah, it's interesting because there are definitely games where I'm like, that game sounds stressful and I don't want to be stressed playing games. But then I definitely play some stressful games where I'm like, but like there's a sense of catharsis at the end of them. So yeah, it's interesting.
It's your ability to pick when you want that type of release, right?
Yeah.
So yeah,
absolutely.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Oh no, who wants to play the relationship fight board game? You know, loser has to sleep on the couch.
I feel like I don't know. There probably is a game that does that somewhere.
Yeah.
I mean, does Fog of Love do it?
Fog of Love is, I think, an interesting example of a game that can elicit different kinds of emotions because you're playing a fictitious couple, and that fictitious couple can have a bad time, right? Role-playing games tend to do it in a way that board games don't, like in Dread, the Jenga game. Like
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
all gonna come to a bad end, right? And
Yeah.
that's part of the experience or the joy, or sometimes I mean it's right in the title, right? The dread of it.
Yeah. I mean, there's lots of movies that do that to us, so why not board games too? You know, like why separate out? And I get saying, you know, that isn't for me, but there's lots of people who want to go through that experience, and you know, for whatever reason, maybe they've gone through it themselves and they want to see it outside themselves, or maybe they just want to experience something stressful for the night or whatever. So
And I think we're seeing the rise of games like that, especially in the indie space.
Yeah.
Like I've been talking about this game all year, so I'll continue to talk about it. But I really love Mending, which was
okay.
I believe by Shingen Core. It's a game where the premise of the game is that you are visiting a friend that you haven't
Uh-huh.
seen in a long time. And the way it's played, speaking of, we're gonna bring it all back to cross stitching and sewing.
Okay.
The way it's played is that you're given a big cloth map, and at the very start of the map, it's all separated into a grid, but it's a beautifully illustrated map. You sew a button in one square, and then on the opposite side of the map, you sew in one of those squares. You sew another button, and then as you play the game, you're literally stitching a path between your button and the button that represents your friend's house. And as you enter a new space in the grid, you pull a card, and it gives you a prompt to basically have you examine why you're making this journey, or who your friend is, or what your relationship with them is. And at the very end, when you reach your friend's, there are rules for also if you decide halfway through you don't want to go to your friend's house anymore, which I think is really interesting as like a game design, and as an emotional experience. But then at the end of your game, you'll reach your friend's house and you'll essentially draw a conclusion card that ends that gameplay and ends that story. And it's a very fascinating. Speaking of games that allow you to kind of experience emotions or bring emotions into it, it does that just I think a really fun way. And then at the end, you have this very beautiful map that you've sewn and drawn on that reminds you of that story you've told, which is very cool.
Yeah. I am intrigued now. This is one I haven't heard of. So very cool. Anything else that you want to share, Kara, with us tonight? Anything that you want to talk about that you missed? It's been a lot of fun talking to you.
I've a blast. I love if you guys can tell, I love talking about games. The only thing I love more than making games is playing games, and the only thing I love more than playing games is talking about games. So I'm all in.
Are you going to be at any cons or anything this year?
Not this year, unfortunately. Hopefully next year. We'll see about the state of the world.
Yeah.
I miss them. I miss them terribly. Which is funny because I'm someone who like loves going to cons, but like I always try and get hotels really close because I have to take breaks because so many people is always really overwhelming. Even when I liked them. But now I miss them, and I'm like, I even miss like the hour I would need after I got back from a con where I'd be like, okay, I just don't want anyone to talk to me. Like this is my hour of unspooling.
Yeah. No, I totally get it. The world is still weird. A suggestion though, for easing back into things, if you did like going to cons, but then you also got worn out, try like one that's like 200 or 300 people when you do try, and then like ease back into it whenever you do next year, or whenever. I don't. Is there normal anymore?
Good question.
Thank you.
If you want to ferment something, Mangchi, Maangchi on YouTube. She's how I use it, and she's great cooking.
I would say that's perfect. We bought our cookbook. So we haven't tried anything out of it yet, but we bought our cookbook, so that is an extra recommendation to that. So I'm excited.
Mangchi's like top 3 YouTube chefs. So Brad Leone and Maddie Madison too.
Is Brad Leone the guy in New York?
Yeah, he's on Bon Appetit.
Yeah.
I haven't actually watched any of them in like a year, so I got off of YouTube. Well, except for when this gets posted. I'll be on YouTube technically. Sorry. Yeah.
Word.
We're
Kara, your words have been great. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me. This was fun to talk.
see you in a con in 2 years.
Yeah.